And then there were two. Today, the CDC and the FDA called for an immediate pause in the use of the Johnson & Johnson single-dose shot over reports those half-dozen women developed a rare blood clot disorder within a couple of weeks of getting the vaccine, one of whom, as I said, died. The cases represent a very small fraction of the nearly 7 million people who've gotten the vaccine so far in the U.S., but public health officials said today they're acting out of an abundance of caution.
People say, what does a pause mean? It really allows both the FDA and the CDC to further investigate these cases to try and understand some of the mechanisms of what it is that might shed some light on looking forward, what will happen and what we will do. That's the first thing. The other thing is to make physicians out there aware of this, and there are some clinical implications of that.
And while they say there's very little risk to people who got the J&J vaccine more than a month ago, CDC officials are urging people who've gotten it more recently to be on the lookout for certain symptoms.
If you've received the vaccine and developed severe headache, abdominal pain, leg pain, or shortness of breath, you should contact your healthcare provider and seek medical treatment.
These cases have also prompted Johnson & Johnson to delay their rollout in Europe while investigations into the U.S. incidents play out. For more on what all this means for the vaccine rollout in this country with COVID cases on the rise, particularly among young people, I'm joined by Dr. Nahid Bhadelia, Associate Professor at Boston University School of Medicine and the Medical Director of the Special Pathogens Unit at Boston Medical Center. Doctor, it's good to see you as always.
Good to see you, Jim.
So what do you say to somebody who says, I've heard all these arguments, but I got a J&J shot 3 days ago, and I am really nervous, doctor? What do you tell him or her?
Well, Jim, I think that, it's good that I would take this as a sign that our system of monitoring, even for rare vaccine-associated adverse effects, is working. Because you really are looking at a pretty rare signal of 6 out of 7 million doses. There are 6 women out of 7 million doses that were given out. There's a couple of things. If you just got your J&J vaccine, there are a couple of things to sort of parse out here. Majority of these cases, all of these cases, the 6 cases, were in young women under the age of 50. And it occurred between 6 to 13 days. So if, but and the thought is that one of the reasons you might be seeing this is because the mechanism behind what these blood clots are, and they seem to be slightly different than the blood clots that may be from immobility or if you go on a long travel. In this scenario, there is a thought that it might be related to, in some people with genetic propensity, that once you get this vaccine, you may develop antibodies against part of your blood that helps develop clotting. And so you get stroke-like symptoms and clots in some areas of your body, and then you get bleeding on the other. But in all of these cases, right, you're looking at a particular subpopulation and you're looking at a very rare symptom. So monitor yourself, of course, for any types of those emergency signs that that CDC just talked about. But I would not be concerned because really, despite all this, the risks of clots from COVID itself, believe it or not, are much higher, as are other risk factors such as oral contraceptives. For example, the risk of oral contraceptives causing a blood clot is about 40 in 100,000. And here we're talking about 1 in over 1 million.
Well, I can meet your facts and raise you even 1. I mean, while it's 1 in 1 million who got the clot, it's only 1 in 7 million who died. And I did a little math today. It's roughly 1 in 7,000 who die from COVID. But on the radio today, we took calls from people who understood all the numbers, doctor. But as you know far better than I, vaccine hesitancy, except for the crazy political types, is more born of emotion than it is, challenging the science. So we've even had people call today who said now they're nervous about Pfizer and Moderna because of what happened with Johnson & Johnson. How do you deal with the emotional reluctance?
Yeah, I think that it's a well-known fact that new risks, if you introduce people to new risks, they're more likely to be alarmed by it than the ones that they're already in their background. So, walking down the street, flying or any of these other things, they're a risk to all of our activities, as well as all of the vaccines and medications that we take have adverse effects, particularly for rare populations. So you're right. It is an emotional part of this. The way that we handle it is, as you said, we provide the data. But then we talk about the fact that, what this may require is also just looking at the system is working. What this pause is going to allow the FDA to do is now take a look at these 6 cases to see if they're really plausibly, really truly are related to the vaccine. My sense is that they may find that there might be a mechanism similar to what's happening with AstraZeneca, because Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca are very similar in terms of their technology. Yeah. They're using another virus, a vector. And so you may not be seeing the same rates, even how rare these are, you may not be seeing the same thing in the mRNA vaccines that exist there. But despite that, the way we move forward is to allow the FDA to do the full analysis, and then to find people who are highest risk for potentially developing these types of side effects and keeping a closer eye to make sure that we can prevent any adverse effects. Overall, the biggest thing is trying to have a conversation within our offices, doctors' offices, and in these types of conversations that you and I are having, to put the risk really into focus for people compared to the risk from COVID, compared to the risk of clots from other conditions.
In retrospect, though, in light of the fact, I'm glad you brought up the point you just did, there hasn't been a demonstrated causal connection between the vaccine and the blood clots. Would it not have been better to wait to announce the pause until they'd investigated whether there actually was such a connection?
So, Jim, I think part of the reason that they may have taken this step is anytime you see events with greater frequency than what you might have expected, they want to take a look at it. But this comes in the aftermath of recent data that's coming out of AstraZeneca. So the findings of, I think as a 1 in 250,000 is what they described in the European Medicines Agency. And the data from that vaccine, there is a little bit more biological plausibility suggested. There are papers that came out at the end of last week that suggest exactly, as I said, that in some rare conditions, in particular individuals who have propensity for this, you may have this reaction. So I think they are responding to that and being cautious, abundance of caution to ensure that because they're similar technologies, you're not seeing something that's a similar link with Johnson & Johnson.
Okay, so last question. If a patient came to you, let's assume they do determine that there is a causal connection. A patient comes to you and says, should I get the Johnson & Johnson vaccine? Actually, let me rephrase that question. A patient who is a woman who's between 18 and 48 comes to you and says, should I get the Johnson & Johnson vaccine? What do you tell her, doctor?
Well, currently, I think that we still have to work out to figure out how high this risk is. I would say that since we have options to offer for the high-risk population, for those who are in this high risk, what some of the other countries, the stance that they have taken is potentially giving people who are in that high risk, young women, other vaccine candidates just to avoid even this very rare side effect that we're talking about. And that's what if a link is discovered, that's what I would probably imagine the FDA may consider as well, if they do anything other than just restarting the vaccination. So one thing that I do think is going to be interesting to watch, Jim, is that Johnson & Johnson has a trial, if you remember, with a second dose with 2 doses. And it'll be interesting to see how FDA's current announcement is going to affect the trial where people are getting 2 doses of Johnson & Johnson, and if that will be placed on pause as well. And that's going to be something to watch out for.
Doctor, as always, incredibly helpful. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Jim.